Okay, great. Well, thank you everybody for joining us today. And I'm starting to see that we've got a solid amount of people joining us tonight. So thank you for everybody joining from Vietnam and around Asia. I know it's getting late. And also people who are joining us from the US time zones, which is super early for you guys. So for today, the webinar is the launch webinar for our upcoming white paper called Transitioning Towards Plastic Circularity, Vietnam's Upstream Future. The event is hosted by ICM Falk Foundation with Evergreen Labs, and our organizational partner is the Incubation Network. And during this webinar, we're going to be focusing on the best practices that are going to be shared by on-the-ground experts in the plastic upstream innovation ecosystem in Vietnam, but also in South and Southeast Asia. So let's begin. Sorry. So for the webinar today, we're going to have a few sections. The first section is going to be focused on introducing everybody to the baseline definition of circular economy and also upstream innovation. We'll also introduce a few key findings from our white paper to introduce, and then we're going to introduce you guys to the entrepreneurs who are having two keynotes explaining how they have developed and what were the challenges that they managed to overcome with their upstream innovative solutions in Vietnam. Our panel discussion afterwards is going to be focused on ecosystem builders, the intermediaries of this ecosystem, what were their key challenges, and how they have supported all the entrepreneurs within ASEAN. All participants are welcome to start asking questions all along the webinar, and we dedicated a last section for the Q&A with the final reveal of the white paper link during the fifth and final section. And this webinar is moderated by me, Tiffane. I am the Strategic and Program Advisor for the ICM Falk Foundation. And now I would like to introduce you to our speakers today. We have Jan Zellmann from Glassia Vietnam, who is actually replacing Kasia Lena, who unfortunately cannot join us today. Then we have Markus from Lecka Vietnam, Matteo from the Incubation Network, Shravan from AtWorks, and Gautam from the ICM Falk Foundation. So just a few notes on the panel best practices. So please mute all of your mic during the webinar. Use the Q&A and chat boxes wisely. The Q&A for questions to the speakers and chat box for interaction amongst participants. And do feel free to interact amongst yourselves if you have any comments and comments and questions to other participants. And we would also like you to introduce yourself first in the chat box and also rename yourself according to this format: name, organization, and title. And again, please use the Q&A box if you have any questions. So let's begin with the introduction. So what is a circular economy and what is upstream innovation within a circular economy? So as we all know, there is a huge plastic crisis going on in the world. According to the Breaking the Plastic Wave report by the Pew Charitable Trust report, there are over 29 million tons of plastic that would be leaking into the ocean by 2040. So just in about 2 decades, if we don't do anything about the way we're doing business, the way we're consuming, and the way we're doing production. So that's on the global scale. So what happens when we zoom in into ASEAN? And it's not any better because we still have 31 million tons of plastic waste that are being generated every year just from 6 out of 10 ASEAN countries. And that's from the latest ADB report. And with all these numbers, we might think that the quickest and best way to solve it is to deal with all the generated waste. However, if we look a little bit deeper into Vietnam, for example, only a bit over a quarter of the plastic waste actually gets recycled. So it makes us wonder, is recycling actually working? And if not, which is the case, what can we do to complement the recycling action so that we can prevent waste from leaking into the environment? That's where the circular economy steps in. We need a framework that's actually not just recycling, and that we're thinking a bit more holistically with a systems thinking method where we could both where we're going to eliminate waste and pollution, we're going to circulate whatever we're going to make, and also we're going to give back to nature what we took from it. And in the best case scenario, if we do both recycling and reduction efforts at the same time, we'll be able to reduce by 80% the flow of plastic getting to the ocean. And that would also imply that we're getting a financial benefit from it. We're going to be able to save about 200 billion US dollars just with optimized production and optimized recycling methods. So with all that, we're going to ask ourselves, okay, so we know that there is this framework, but what if we're not recycling that, what are we doing within this framework? And this is where upstream innovation steps in, because upstream innovation here is the twin sister of recycling. We're going to think a little bit further upstream, further up the value chain, and say, okay, we're going to tackle the root problem, and we're going to actually turn off the tap, prevent waste from ever being created by simply eliminating what's not necessary, from packaging to throwaways. We're going to reuse products that have been produced, and we're going to circulate materials that have been made. So in Vietnam, that's what we noticed that was missing. With the ICM Falk Foundation, we found out that most of the effort were very downstream focused, and that in order to create an upstream innovation pipeline that would be very sustainable and that would create more solutions to complement recycling effort, we've been launching a 3-pillar approach where we do research, we look into new ideas through our knowledge hub in order to build capacity through our circularity ecosystem with universities and students to give them the tools to become future entrepreneurs and innovators to find the solutions. And once there are the early stages and the early ideas of a solution, we bring them to the Upstream Venture Lab, where we actually test and pilot those solutions with other ESOs, other funders, and most importantly, with the entrepreneurs. And all of these efforts are done in collaboration through a funding, facilitation, and fostering lens with all of our ecosystem partners, going from 10 to all the entrepreneurs that we're seeing here today, and from our grantees too. So those efforts, those collaboration led to this actual white paper that we did with Evergreen Labs, where we found that if we look through the ecosystem stakeholders, the entrepreneurs, the support organizations, and the funders, there is a very monotonous state of play where most of the ventures are focused on plastic substitution solutions, and they're still very early stages, as in they're either ideas or they just are getting launched. And support organizations and also funders, they are also along the same line, where they are supporting and funding for competitions, hackathons, challenges to discover more ideas and to support just the early launch phases. But that leads to an actual problem wherein entrepreneurs will struggle to get corporate buy-in, because it's simply just very risky for corporates to get into an early venture. They would also get they will find it very difficult to get growth support from organizations and appropriate funding from the financial institutions. So the overall ecosystem that we found through our white paper in Vietnam is that there is a very nascent ecosystem that needs so much more collaboration, that needs so much more ideas and projects that need to be piloted together. And that is why we want to give the stage to entrepreneurs who are actually representing this ecosystem. So first of all, we're going to have Jan from Glassia, and then Markus from Lecka. Jan is the founder at Glassia with a background in finance. He started Evergreen Labs with Glassia Vietnam back in 2016, and one of their ventures, that venture studio, is Glassia, a refillable and reusable water bottling facility. So now I'm going to leave it to Jan to start his presentation.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. My name is Jan Zellmann. I'm the co-founder of Evergreen and Glassia Water. Glassia Water is a social enterprise headquartered in Da Nang, offering plastic-free water through a circular refill model. Our upstream solutions targets businesses seeking to eliminate plastic consumption, and specifically single-use water bottles. Mismanaged plastic waste is our generation's most devastating environmental crisis. 90 million tons of plastic is consumed in Vietnam, out of which only 25% is recycled. We target to eliminate plastic in the first place through an upstream solution. Next slide, please. This is how Glassia was born, but it wasn't quite as easy as replicating the good old model of refilling bottles and delivering, because glass bottles actually have a worse environmental footprint than plastic if used only once. So we knew we had to create a circular system. We now take back the bottles, sterilize them, refill them. Through the direct B2B approach, we can use bottles up to 40 times. However, we still had to face the pricing issue because, firstly, a plastic bottle is cheaper than a glass bottle. But more importantly, the transport cost of glass is higher. So we established a decentralized approach, which now enables us to match prices with high quality plastic water bottles. But this, of course, only works if we can ensure the same quality and can enjoy the same trust as branded plastic water bottles. So we early on decided to not only get the first facility, but all future facilities HACCP and ISO certified. Lastly, we offer a fully customizable solution. Our filling line allows for different sizes, different shapes, so that our customers, if they become regular customers, can purchase their own bottles, customize them with their own branding, which is not only a selling point, but it actually also reduces our investment cost in bottle inventory. Next slide, please. Where do we stand today? The first facility was completed in April 2021, and in the rest of the year in 2021, we sold around 35,000 bottles. Now, we really hit the worst possible time with basically all larger hotels and resorts closing down. It would have been around 50,000 bottles if we projected it over the year, which is 5% of our capacity. One facility can, with one line, can fill around 1 million bottles. However, with the 5% capacity utilization, we actually broke even, which leaves enough room for us to grow and gives us a lot of motivation to replicate. If we were to operate at full capacity, a single facility can reduce CO2 emissions by 200 tons per year. Our next step, of course, is not only the scaling part, but really, because we have a decentralized model, rapid replication. Now, our model is fairly simple, so the time is now. But the next city we are going into is Ho Chi Minh City, which we have just completed a feasibility study, which turned out to be quite positive, and the planning is underway. We noticed high demand. Almost 90% of survey respondents were generally interested in switching to glass bottled water, and 56% of the businesses stated that shifting towards sustainability is a priority. We are also the most affordable glass bottle. We're almost 3 times cheaper than any comparable glass bottle at the quality, which allows us not only to sell to sell to hotels and F&B sectors so they can resell the bottles, but actually sell to hotels to use it as complementary water in the rooms. And that's really where a lot of volume is consumed. And I think my time is up. Looking forward to the continued conversation with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jan. That was super insightful. And also I would like to highlight that the feasibility study that you guys did in Ho Chi Minh City was actually done in partnership with the ICM Falk Foundation. So we're super stoked to see what happens next in Ho Chi Minh City for you guys. And yeah, coming up, and thank you for sharing all of that. And coming up next, we have Markus from Lecka Vietnam. So Lecka Vietnam is a sustainable snack company, with a no plastic policy. And Lecka is also a certified B Corporation. And so we would give the stage to Markus now to tell us more about his no packaging policy and no plastic packaging policy, and how he came about with it.
Thank you. From one German to another German. So you're going to have a lot of German accent now to listen to. Apologies, but we like to be on time and in time. So got 5 minutes to talk about Lecka. Thanks for having me. Very briefly, what we have started here in Vietnam. That's exactly the slide we're looking for. When I came to Vietnam 2 years ago, I was running a lot and around Vietnam in the nature and the cities. And what you see is just so much plastic. We heard about it. We also have so much sugar in different type of products, whether it's drinks or foods or snacks. So we ask ourselves, do we want more plastic, more sugar? Of course, we don't want that. So Lecka is one of the first healthy snack and eco-friendly companies here in Vietnam, maybe Southeast Asia, where we on the one hand side only take natural ingredients from Vietnam. So we don't use anything imported. That already cuts carbon emission, I think, by 40% because we don't import. And on the other side, we're using this very innovative 3-layer packaging material that is bio-based, biodegradable, and even home compostable. So I don't want to brag too much about that side. It's really more about our journey, how we got there in the last 1.5 years, really. We launched the product you can see on the right side last November, so it's only a few months old. And we had a bit of a journey to get there. So on one hand side, next slide, please. We had to look into the material. I guess that's what we're talking about. How do we eliminate plastic? Close the tap, as we have heard it many times already. And we felt strongly about having a material that will not outlive us. Right? And as a millennial myself and all the other following generations, we seem to care about this topic and something creating waste that will not be there when we're dying. So we decided to bring up this material that is a combination of paper, cellulose, and cornstarch. This is a 3-layered paper that gives us the compostability, which means within 12 months, it is completely disappearing, no microplastic, non-ecotoxic, and nothing is left behind. In an environment of 28 degrees, that's ideal. It can be cooler, it can be warmer, but basically you can put it into your home compost and you can reuse the soil again. Well, it sounds easy, but you can see from the pictures, it was a very tough journey. And this is just a few of the pictures I took during our 3 months testing with the machine. Before we had 8 months shelf life testing to be really sure to get it right. The world is built around plastic, the packaging machines, the production, the print shops, everything is built around plastic. For us to actually get to the point to buy a machine, a packaging machine in this case, for our material was a big issue. We went through several packaging machine suppliers who rejected us and declined to sell us machines because we were using a funny material. And yeah, we were saying we're going to pay you money, but no, we don't want to sell the machine. So to get to that point was a really big step, and then to adjust the machine to make it work. You can see we have many issues with cutting, with sealing, temperature, with printing. It's a long story. Anyway, patience was required to make it work, and after 3 months, we made it work. That this material is actually now just another usual packaging material used on industrialized machines in our factory here in Hanoi. That's one big learning. The second learning, next slide, please, was the customers. This is a cute little picture from a Vietnamese friend of ours, which I think represents a bit how we see the consumers feeling about our material. Somewhat excited, somewhat not excited, not too sure about it. And if I would put a number to it, we feel that around 5, maybe less than 5, around 5% of our customers actually deeply care that we have biodegradable, bioplastic, bio-based, no plastic material. It is a number that is, of course, not too high yet, and we like to change it. But most of our time goes into education, making sure that people understand what is compostability, what is bio-based, what are the downsides, what are the pros and cons for using this material. And yeah, we're hoping that in Vietnam it will change, and it can only change the government, other stakeholders, including all, I think in the audience here today are paying attention, so that's great. So we hope that this is going to be also the future for Vietnam, and the generation of this little boy will enjoy those kind of packaging materials. So lastly, last slide, please. That is then, we made it work. There's a picture of me. I'm holding the first product in my hands. I remember that day very clearly. It was around 2nd of November, where we managed to produce our first product, which was super exciting, and so much blood, sweat, and tears went into this. And if I may just summarize it, really, it was to make sure and to endure it works. It will work out eventually. Educate is really what I'm just talking about, the customers, consumers, to make them understand what material is about. And then, not going to lie, export is really big for us now. We are about to launch in Singapore, about to launch in Thailand, where the market is more receptive towards eco-friendly products. Yeah, so quick journey from Lecka here in Vietnam, where we're changing the material, we're changing the ingredients to be overall more carbon efficient. We are carbon neutral now. Packaging is a big part of it. We are saving 1/3 of the carbon emission by using this kind of material compared to petrochemicals. Thanks a lot. Pleasure to be here, and hope for a good conversation.
Awesome. Thank you, Markus. I feel like Lecka's packaging is one of like the few success stories, like we discussed before, where you don't want to like commercialize it, but it feels like a great product that was prototyped so quickly, and that actually achieved what wants to do, and also the growth journey of it too. It's also amazing. And we're already seeing a few questions to you and to Jan actually that we're gonna ask later on during the Q&A section. So now I will move on to the actual panel discussion with our ecosystem builders. First up, we have Matteo Chiampo from the Incubation Network. He is the director of operations there, with a background, and if I'm not mistaken, in engineering. And he works for the Incubation Network, which is a regional support organization, which has been helping philanthropists such as the ICM Falk Foundation, but also other entrepreneurs around the region to really achieve the plastic-free and pollution-free ocean in South and Southeast Asia. So, Matteo, as an initiative by the Circular Initiative and Second Muse, what really brought TIN to widen your reach to ASEAN and support upstream circular ventures? And also, what were the opportunities and the learnings that you got away from this this initiative?
Thank you very much, Stefan. Great question. And I would say this question actually is composed of two parts, right? So one is more about the geographic focus, why ASEAN, and the second part is why are we looking as a ecosystem builder at the upstream to find ventures to support. So let me just start with the first question. We've heard in the introduction that the plastic pollution generation problem is really massive here in South and Southeast Asia. In fact, from several data points that we keep hearing over and over again, there is an estimated 8 million metric tons of plastic entering the ocean every year, and 80% of that is estimated to come from South and Southeast Asia. Of that, 80% comes from specifically 5 countries: India, Indonesia, Thailand, Philippines, and Vietnam. And those are kind of generally overlapping with ASEAN country. And really, if you think of it, is basically 2/3 of the plastic pollution leaking in the ocean coming from these few countries. So we as an organization, were strategically deciding where to really focus our attention to achieve the maximum impact, we thought, well, we should go and fish where the fish is. In this case, unfortunately, the fish is plastic. And we decided to actually really focus and cover ASEAN countries, specifically our 5 focus countries for our intervention. So for the second part of going upstream, I want to use a small analogy here. So if probably many of the people in the audience, we often have heard in our initial contacts with dynamic system modeling, the example of the bathtub. A very simple system, an input, an outflow, and a stock of water. So the bathtub has some water in it and keeps being filled and keeps shedding water from a plant. So we all learned very soon in our in this first exercise in system modeling that there is no amount of mopping the floor that will fix permanently the problem of an overflowing bathtub. The only way to fix that overflowing problem is to either reduce the input or increase the output. Tragically, for the ocean plastic pollution problem, there is no way to increase the output. There is no going away of the plastic. Plastic will be in that system for hundreds of years, 500, 800 years, much longer than the average human life. So we won't see that plastic go away. Hence, the only way to really reduce the need for mopping is to go upstream and turn off the tap. And so from this very simple analogy and translating this analogy into a more pragmatic and concrete field of innovation, this means looking for and supporting startups and other organizations that develop ways to do just that, to kind of turn off the tap, reduce the plastic entering the system, whether through new business model like Glassia's water refill approach, or replacing plastic with better, smarter materials like Markus is doing in Vietnam with his Lecka energy bars. And so that's really kind of the common sense approach that we took using this analogy of a simple dynamic system to move upstream. And in our multi-year quest, our program is a multi-year program, multi-country program to support the ecosystem of innovators in the region. We have found several examples similar to that. And we love to support this type of entrepreneurs. A few examples, for instance, Cyclus Refill, which provides doorstep refill services for daily staples in Indonesia to Indonesian households, typically mid to low income households. And their objective is to basically eliminate or drastically reduce the use of sachet. These single portions that are probably also very prevalent in Vietnam, I'm assuming, that are a real tragedy for the environment, because not only for the environment, also for the user, but for the environment because they are packaged. Those are products that are packaged in multi-layer plastic. They are difficult to recycle to begin with, and on top of that, once dispersed in the environment, they have very low value. They don't have a market, and therefore they are not picked up by collectors and by recyclers. Hence, they leak in the environment. TIN has supported this woman-led company through various phases, from very early stages all the way through a growth phase that they are currently running through, with mentorship, with grant money, with programmatic support, with technical assistance. And we're really seeing them flourish and grow, raising more grants, increasing their product lineup, increasing their geographic spread, and also recently signing an agreement with Nestlé to deliver some of the loved products across the region, like Milo, chocolate powders, and so on and so forth. So this is a great example, again, of business model that adapts to reduce, eliminate the entry of materials in the system. Now, one of the key learning that we've had in the past 2.5 years is that the problem of plastic pollution in the ocean is so large and complex that solving it will require all of the above approach. So we, at the Incubation Network, we don't hope to find a single silver bullet and solve the problem by just going upstream. Upstream is important, but besides supporting those great innovators in the upstream side, we also work with those who are kind of cleaning the mess, are mopping the floor, those who are actually picking up the water after it has spilled out of the bathtub, and there is a lot of that. And so we work with companies that are optimizing recycling, they are scaling up their recycling capability, or innovators like Novoloop, which upcycle plastic waste into performance chemical materials. They were part of one of our programs. They received technical assistance, mentorship, and a little bit of grant money, and they went on to raise $11 million in funding just a few months ago. Or another company, Ertos, from Canada, which is replacing fossil fuel-based resins with bio-based inputs. Again, female funded, or Magorim, which is based in Singapore, that is basically upcycling hard to recycle and low value plastic into road paving materials to basically find a long-term use for those materials that otherwise would most likely end up in landfills or leaking in the environment. So this is kind of our approach and our learnings in a very short summary across the region and across different verticals for the past 2.5 years of supporting great entrepreneurs. Not only entrepreneurs, we also obviously work with other ecosystem players, but I think for tonight, really entrepreneurship and innovation is the key topic.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Matteo, for sharing. And yeah, as somebody who has been following your work very closely with TIN, I feel like it's a great example of what we could do if, innovation and support is done through the whole pipeline as a whole, and with a collaborative approach between, like you said, entrepreneurs, innovators, but also other organizations around the region. So now that Matteo has spoken, we would like to give the spotlight to Shravan Shankar, who is the co-founder of Climake and AtWorks, and he's been working as a leading ecosystem builder, especially within circular entrepreneurship. And for today, we would like to ask him, working at the intersection of climate, finance, and innovation, what did you actually learn from designing programs to adequately support entrepreneurs in the field of circular entrepreneurship?
Sure. Thank you very much, Stefan. And it's a pleasure to be here. Big fans of the work that you're doing and how you're looking to build the plastic circularity ecosystem in Vietnam, and I'm really looking forward to it. So I'm an ESO and I'm based in India. And what that basically means is I work closely with climate and circularity startups in a way that allows us to scale their organizations and consequently the impact they create. And we are very, very happy to be supported by TIN in some of the work we have done, which I'll cover a bit later. So the important lesson for us is to really build meaningful programs that create tangible outcomes that startups can capitalize on. And for us, those outcomes are only one of two things. It's either we're increasing access to customer markets, or we're increasing access to finance, which allows startups to reach customer markets. I'm not going to focus too much on the access to finance bit, because this whole customer market acceleration is, for us at least, pretty much the main key that you need to unlock what an ecosystem can create. So, as Markus and Jan, and I think even Matteo has spoken about, we need to tackle upstream plastics. In Southeast Asia and in South Asia, there's too much of focus on downstream. We keep having the tap open and we expect to clean it up at the end of the pipe. So, we do have brands who are adopting some steps towards plastic circularity materials from plant-based plastics, but the adoption is really not keeping in place what we need. And there's a bit of a circular problem here. So a lot of these innovations are from early stage startups, like you've heard, and their ability to scale is limited. The price points they are able to provide this can be quite high because they don't have economies of scale. And companies have this usual standard line of saying, come to me when you have, your prices are more affordable. But unfortunately, that is only suitable if they can actually get customers to create those economies of scale to reduce prices. So, for example, one of the most common programs that we have are pilots. And there's just too many programs like pilots which don't end up enough with startups being able to build. And you see this phenomenon of pilot hopping. So startups will jump from one pilot to another, and they don't really crack commercial market adoption. So something really has to give to make market adoption easier. And that's what we did with the Circular Impact Market Accelerator program, where we were wonderfully supported by TIN, which was designed as a way to create pilots that lead to long-term engagement for circularity startups with large customers in key sectors. So we designed this CIMA program, CIMA, to make market access easier and faster. And we spent time identifying what sort of products probably could work well, what sectors are effective and ripe for this. And we narrowed it down to tackling around packaging and single-use plastics in the F&B sector in India. Now, we had a few factors which really made this suitable, like we had good consumer expectations on this particular sector. There were compliance and regulatory bans coming to the picture, which created incentives. And we liked the idea of targeting food because we saw that this was an opportunity to create an influence of how people move towards sustainable lifestyles, and food tends to be one of the first things that they actually adopt with. So we identified a really interesting company called Impresario Restaurants, which is a huge restaurant chain in India. And that's kind of important because they had significant volume demand to work and give a good number for these startups towards those economies of scale. And they're also high profile enough to influence other brands in that sector to adopt solutions. So we pitched them the idea that this was an opportunity to co-create solutions and not a traditional vendor-client relationship. And this is very important, as in the latter format, a company will expect a 100% ready solution. Because we're talking about startups who often do not have the full solution in place, they may be 80% there. There is a need for customization. There is a need of working closely with the needs of the company you're working with at the end. And that's what you need sampling, you need piloting for. So that's how we designed the whole piloting phase. And we were very metrics and targets driven around plastic impact, product quality, pricing, volumes. And we basically got entered into an understanding with the company and the startups, which was tailored for each startup, that if they met these targets, this is what the long-term engagement would hinge upon. And our pilot has been quite successful. I think we had about 4 good plastic upstream solutions that were piloted. 2 of them have a long-term engagement in the bag, and the other 2, there are still some discussions going on. And I think one thing which is nice for us to see it's coming out is TIN has launched an amazing program focused around market adoption called the SUP Challenge. I think Evergreen Labs is one of the companies which is actually doing a cohort around this. So it's really encouraging to see how this clear focus on building structures for market adoption is there. But for us, market accelerator and that whole model is just one key element of what a thriving plastic circularity ecosystem needs. So the way we look at constructing these is that access to markets and access to finance structures are high profile, high impact structures around which you can build like other very key parts of an ecosystem. Tiffany, I think the next slide would be useful here. Yep. And here we're not talking about an ecosystem in the sense that it's traditional support services. We're talking about structures that are needed to seed ventures, to take them from an idea on paper to product adoption to growth. And the thesis we work with around ecosystems and fundamentally in plastic circularity, we break it down to 6 types of categories around which structures can be built. So the first is having a strong ground level understanding of the needs and opportunities, and structures and activities around that are like hackathons, ecosystem mappings like what ICM and Evergreen have just done, and challenge programs. The second is around building early stage market adoption. And frankly, this for us is the most crucial stage, because without having this in place where you can create market opportunities, you really can't do the future focus. Then once you've sort of built up this pent up demand, there is, you see that there is an opportunity to create longer term support for less mature teams. So this is around incubation, around venture building, where you can be a lot more supportive and have a longer time frame of working with such programs. And then you sort of start needing more diversified forms of financing. It's not just equity, you do need debt and other more suitable forms of financing in place. And one of the interesting things that we came across was we saw a lot of really interesting ideas and projects which were stuck at a lab scale, but they had this hypothetical idea of basically being the game-changing solution as possible. But you kind of need a way for those to be implemented in the real world. So you need things like an innovation demonstration fund to pick up. And ultimately, at the end, you just need to find more ways to bring more capital in the space. So this is a very brief and quick snapshot of how we build and how we look to support plastic circularity ecosystems. And yeah, we're very excited to see how this approach that ICM is taking builds up in Vietnam. Thank you.
Thank you, Shravan. Sorry for skipping the slide, but time was up. So thank you. And obviously, the way you've designed programs has been very helpful for us at ICM too, a big source of inspiration, especially the way you cut up things into different growth phases in order to really build adequate programs for each type of ventures instead of lumping them all together into one cohort. So yeah, thank you again for sharing all of your great experience with the CIMA program with TIN. And now we're going to give the stage to Gautam Ramnath, my executive director at the ICM Falk Foundation. He's worked in lots of things, including architecture, construction management, sustainable design. And now he is a venture builder, startup founder, a board advisor, and also a professor apparently at a business school in Mexico City. And for today, I would like to ask him, with our holistic and innovation-focused grant approach, what were the key drivers to adopt this novel way of giving philanthropic grants, especially in Vietnam?
Great. Thanks, Tiff. Really appreciate you allowing me to say a few words here, and really want to thank a lot of the participants and the panelists in today's webinar. It's, I think, testament to the fact that Upstream is growing as a market, and that these experiments, both sustainable, non-sustainable, what have you, are really going to be the initial sort of pioneering intel that we need to really grow this market. I think over the past 40 minutes or so, I think we've been talking about circular economies, and I think everyone is on board, I think, in terms of its adoption or the need for its adoption, but at a massive scale in order to address sort of the net zero emissions issue, or the root causes of climate change, or waste and pollution, amongst other things. And we're starting to see, obviously now, the circular economy's sort of impact overlay over other sectors, like not just plastics, which is what we're talking about today, but fashion, food and ag systems, and even the built environment. That the circular economy has its hand in absolutely everything. What we are responding to is the fact that we've essentially taken on massive debt from the environment, and basically we're headed towards bankruptcy. And so I think many of the panelists' points, I think, that have been made, whether it's the bathtub metaphor that you heard from Matteo, or some of the detailed elements that you heard from Shravan, I think what you're seeing is that, there absolutely needs to be a much more holistic approach to addressing this, and really looking at it from the cause perspective versus the effect perspective. And that's really where Upstream comes in. And I think that the impact case for Upstream is very cut and dry. It's very, very clear. You can read a lot of the seminal reports that are coming out from the MacArthur Foundation and from Pew that really lay out the case and really show the almost doubling of impact effect of upstream when it is worked in complement with downstream. So through that lens, I don't think there's anything more to talk about. I think now we just have to be looking into how we actually do this. Now, going back to the original point is that, how do you actually start moving this at a scale so that you can truly have that tipping point, so that we can truly have that effect to turn off the tap and to lower the water level within the bathtub, if you will. And that's really from a philanthropic point of view, where that comes from is by actually creating the economic case for it, such that it starts attracting the attention of multiple stakeholders through their lens, because we are, as a stakeholder community, incredibly diverse and driven by a variety of different incentives, all of which don't necessarily align around the idea of a social impact or saying, let's go to upstream. So the economic element needs to balance out the social element. And so that's really where the ICM Falk Foundation began in its approach. We were new to this world. We came in looking at why straws are stuck in turtles, if you will, and really started understanding the supply chain for plastics, for instance, and to see, where a small private foundation could really start engaging and making a big impact in a larger way. And so that's really where we have been focused in sort of the strategic and venture philanthropy through more of an operational model, where we are much more hands-on, that is very, very locally driven, but builds on the global intelligence. And so, the way we came about this particular, I mean, you've already heard this is the problem with being the last speaker, is everyone takes away your good stuff. But you've already heard the case for why ASEAN as well. And that's the reason why we approach this, is that, private, public, or operation, other philanthropic foundations have always played an important role in supporting sustainable development. And this has been the case for decades. But what we have started looking into is moving into a much more operational, local-centric model. And ASEAN is a really interesting case because traditional philanthropic flows of funding have usually been from the US or the EU going into Africa or Asia. And now that Asia and ASEAN in particular is developing into an economic powerhouse, we naturally see wealth gaps developed. And as a result, we see a lot of these issues also now form. But the beauty in Asia is that despite the increase in wealth gaps, what we're actually seeing is dense populations living actually very, very close together. So it's actually a very unique form of philanthropy. It's almost sort of like a for Asia by Asia type approach starting to develop. And we're starting to see really philanthropy play a much greater role within the region. And so as a result, what we did at ICM was say, okay, how can we be part of this community? How can we actually engage as a US-based 501c3 in a much more tangible, on the ground, human-centric way? And what we found is our theory of change seems to be working. And as our panelists today have kind of reinforced, is that there is a need for this systems-based approach, reviewing the entire supply chain. For us to be agile and data-driven, we were very focused in the early days on downstream efforts, which is where majority of people went. And we made the conscious decision to say, you know what, as philanthropy, we have the flexible, unrestricted funding to be able to actually take on something a little bit more holistic. And so we moved upstream. And this was not an easy choice for us. This is not where all the co-funding exists. This is a brand new market. It's very, very nascent, as you've heard, and requires a lot of patience capital. But this is where we felt like we could be a real influencer, a big fish in a small pond, if you will. And so taking on then, obviously, this sort of locally driven approach with an entrepreneurship and innovation focused sort of methodology, it allowed us to say, you know what, can we do a lot with a little? Can we actually deploy low cost but very targeted funding across these particular areas and take on a very patience capital approach, stay with these organizations over a long period of time, and then potentially even invest in them through a venture philanthropy model. And that's what you're seeing some examples of, I think, through this webinar and through the work of a lot of other people. So in the interest of time, I'll kind of cut it short there, but I essentially wanted to share with you very quickly that philanthropy can truly be the glue in developing these creative partnerships that you've seen in the white paper that will allow for true impact, so that you don't have this sort of venture hopping, you don't have the competition hopping, that there is an authentic engagement between the organizations. It's not an easy task to do, but I encourage other funders, philanthropic organizations, family offices to really come and join us in our effort to build the upstream market, not just in Vietnam, but within ASEAN. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, Gautam. Yeah, a more interesting insight from a different perspective of how we're filling in that missing middle from a funding perspective, especially from a philanthropic perspective, where, like you said, in Asia, it's usually from abroad. It's never born and bred in Asia. So we must be one of the first organizations in Vietnam giving grants for upstream innovation entrepreneurs and projects. So yeah, and wrapping up on that, we would like to proceed to the actual Q&A section. And just right before we do that, could we ask all the speakers and panelists to turn on their camera, please? So we could just take apparently a picture. Okay, please, Kelly, tech team and support team, please let me know when it's done so we can proceed to Q&A. Okay, apparently it's done. Okay, Q&A section now. So we've seen a few questions popping in from Sunny Ubali, sorry if I mispronounced your name. I think this question is for Markus. What were the barrier properties, oxygen and water, achieved through the solution? And what is the price hike that we're looking at if we want to shift from plastic to your new solution?
Thank you. Sounds like a question from a packaging expert. Without going too much detail, it's never as good as plastic in terms of moisture and oxygen barrier, but gets close to. So we are achieving up to 9 months shelf life for products where plastic could probably give 12 to 16 months shelf life. So not as good. Price hike depends on volumes as always. So it's very hard to say, to be honest, but we're estimating it to be 3 to 10 times more expensive than plastic.
Okay, I mean, interesting facts, so even more challenges now. And of course, like if there are follow-up questions, we'll give you the contact details of all these speakers so you can actually ask them a more detailed question. And now we've got a question for Jan. Yeah, 2 questions for you. I think there's one that could actually be quite interesting. Could you please tell us more about the refill model in terms of market access and consumers' opinion of the products in Vietnam?
Sure. We really target the hospitality sector because that's where we see the big volumes, and we can go direct. So if we want to keep prices low, we really can't play a distributor game at the moment. We're slowly getting there, but we definitely need to get to a higher production. So for the market access, we really don't need too many hotels, resorts, office complexes to make this a viable solution. So market access is direct to the consumer, who is ultimately a business. So we have a very small sales team, reduces the overhead costs. And yeah, that's the market access, and the feedback we're getting. We haven't lost a customer. Once we get in, we are typically set for a while until pricing of a competitor can undercut us. So far we're very blessed. We had to go a little bit into the B2C market during COVID. We learned a lot, and we can make that model work, but it is not the core of the business.
Okay, interesting insight again. I think it's going to come up in the upcoming case study on Glassia too. And now another question again for Jan and Markus. A really quick question. Are you guys open to licensing your tech beyond Vietnam? For example, the Philippines. This is from Joseph. Hi, Joseph.
Maybe me first. Always.
Yeah.
It's an impact first social enterprise. So if someone wants to replicate the model, I'm sure we can find a way. Ultimately, it is the beauty about our business model is it's the simplest business model you can find. We can probably get you there faster. So happy to talk. But other than that, yeah, generally open for anyone that wants to follow a similar impact path.
Awesome. Thanks, Jan. Markus, I don't know, what are you?
I mean, in terms of tech, we don't have like any IP on the tech side. I think that's not necessarily where we're strong at. But what we are considering is to branch out to Philippines or Indonesia, other countries with amazing local ingredients, and produce products there locally from the farmers. I haven't highlighted our farmer piece. We're working with a lot of small holding sustainable farms here in Vietnam. So that's kind of something we could do also in other markets here, which has just an abundance of amazing ingredients, and to come up with some more local products, local flavors. Philippines, Indonesia, Thailand, top of the list.
Okay, so I guess you guys have a potential investor. Joseph works in finance in the Philippines. Apparently he's an investor there. So I think he'll be happy to connect with you guys. And then we have a question from Kayleen Alvarez from Bilog, Indonesia. I think this question is for both Matteo and Gautam. So how is the sector of plastic upstream innovation, I suppose, how is it being funded in Vietnam? Is it through philanthropy, private sector, or friends and family? So Matteo, would you like to answer first?
I'm gonna take a stab without the assumption of covering all the different streams of funding. So we see a lot of early stage companies. So there is definitely a lot of the classic FFF, friends, families, and fools, typical source of funds for early stage companies. In our experience, and it's our hope that blended capital will play a crucial role. So finding structures where we mix organizations like ICM Falk Foundation, bringing in non-dilutive capital to support those organizations like the one that Shravan mentioned that have not reached the scale necessary to achieve a unit of economics that allows market traction on their own. So we think that in this specific sector in Vietnam, but it's kind of quite consistent across the countries where we work, there is still a very important role to play for blended capital. And we also see, we've started to see actually in Thailand, especially because we have specific programs there, a prevalence of SMEs in this industry, in this space, that are kind of working slightly differently from the classic startup that needs to grow and scale. And so their requirement, the capital type that they require is also slightly different. So we are also trying to develop systems to make those SMEs more compelling and appealing to potentially more traditional capital providers, let's say commercial banks, my goodness, that might come in and in fact offer some support, especially to establish smaller maybe family-owned business that may not be super interested in kind of diluting their equity, their shareholding, and bringing in new equity partners.
I think the only other thing I would add to that, I think Matteo's kind of laid it out really, really well, is that we've been very focused on startups and blended finance and helping this particular portion of the sector grow. There are also enabling environment elements to building a particular market that need to be in place that allow for these startups to succeed. And so there are opportunities, I think, for other funders, the 3Fs and beyond, I think, to really start participating. For instance, on the education side of the house, there's a lot of, it's a sexy thing to talk about with circular economies, but like, do we actually know, does the general populace actually know what the hell they're talking about when we say circular economy or upstream? So building education, for instance, we're developing a curriculum right now with universities to actually integrate circular economies into actual schooling, into their schools. And then the other pieces are really developing the evidence base behind it. And building the economic case across particular sectors. The white paper that you're about to see is one example of such a thing. So there are other elements. You don't have to necessarily be an investor, if you will, or to come in with blended finance. You can be a traditional philanthropist if you'd like, and help build that enabling environment and that ecosystem. It's sort of all boats rising, if you will.
Thank you both for your insights. And just one last bit to wrap up that question is actually, in Vietnam, the portion of funders going to upstream innovation is still very small, very limited. Most of them are coming from abroad or has connection from abroad. And the traditional local investor would be very risk adverse for this type of sector. So that's why you see all these panelists and all these entrepreneurs were mostly foreigners. Even myself, I'm partially a foreigner. So it explains a lot of the ecosystem for the sector. But that is a longer story, and we hope that we can have another webinar about just specifically about funding for upstream innovation in the coming months. So thank you, Kayleen, for your question. And and Kayleen is also from a funding organization from Indonesia. So thank you for the question. And that was the last question of the webinar. And I would like to, so for anybody who didn't see the link in the chat box, you can actually access the white paper through the QR code now. So thank you everybody again for joining us today at very different hours, and feels like everybody is very tired now. So must be a good time to wrap up. And we'll send out a post-event email with the recording, these slides, also all of the speakers' contact information, and also the link to the white paper, so you can have access to it after the webinar. So we hope to see you all around sometime soon. And please also do fill in a quick survey from the chat box so that we can improve future webinars if there are any. And yeah, and thank you so much again for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Steph.
you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, everybody. Have a nice evening and have a nice morning and afternoon to you, Gautam and Shravan.
Thanks, Steph, to you.